So today, what I want to talk a bit about is coding agent or LLM agent security. So my background, I do a lot of kind of security stuff, and like everyone, I've been diving into the world of coding agents, Claude Code, Codex, and all that other thing. And a couple of things kind of made me start thinking that maybe I don't always want to run these things like on my laptop with full access to everything I've got. The first one was I was actually doing a bit of vibe coding, and Claude Code got very upset with itself and deleted every file that it had just created,
Mhm.
and then started talking about the idea that it was a system problem and maybe it should try and fix that. And I kind of had to kill it because I was like, "Whoa, what are you going to do now? Because you're running on my laptop as me. You might try to do things I don't want you to." And the other one is I've been looking into some of as a security person, I look into security stuff. Some of the things that, attackers can try and make agents do just made me think, well, maybe I want to isolate these coding agents a little bit from my main like work environment so that there's a little bit less that they can actually do if they go wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely some important stuff in there. When you and I were in New York recently, we had some good discussions
Mm,
around kinda containerizing or, putting some guardrails around the LLMs and what they're doing.
yeah.
So, yeah, excited to see what you're gonna show us.
Yeah, so let's jump into it, and
Okay.
I'll start this because there's a couple of ways. Now, my background is I do a lot of work in containers, so my first thought was, well, can I just make this a Docker problem, right? Can I essentially, run these agents inside a Docker container and do everything there? And the answer is yes, but it requires a little bit of setup. So I'll kind of stick to Claude Code, which is the one I use most. And one of the things they've come up with is the idea of VS Code and dev containers. So a dev container is kind of like a VS Code plugin, but it essentially integrates with Docker and puts your entire repository and everything you're working on inside a container. And Claude Code actually has like a kind of a base setup for this, so you can go to their repository and you can get that and actually kind of like try it out. So it looks a bit like this. And basically, they give you like a basic Claude Code sandbox, which is designed to run Claude Code. Right. So what this is kind of doing, you have the JSON file you get, and they give you a Docker file that has everything in it. But obviously, this is designed for like Node.js development, so it like sets up all the things you need for Claude Code, but not necessarily all the things you need for their project. So they have the dev container, they have a Docker file, and then they have this init firewall. This was kind of fun. This is a security thing they've tried to do. So they've actually put this in, so it runs this script when it launches the container, and it's trying to like lock down all the network connections. So this is actually not a bad idea because it tries to lock down what you can do. So I started off with this, and you can install Cloud Code and it works. But then the application that I'm kind of trying out on here is a little Golang application that I was playing around with, and I realized you need Golang, right? Dependencies and everything else in there as well. So I was like, well, how do I make this setup work with Golang, right? To have all the Golang dev dependencies and everything. And the answer turned out to be you ask Cloud Code to do it. So in a bit of kind of inception, I said, "Hey Claude, I want to do this thing. Can you basically change this dev container setup so that it'll do Golang development as well as Node.js?" And the answer is yeah. It took a little bit, like everything with these agents. It took a little bit of playing with. It did some stuff in the firewall script that didn't work that I had to go and fix. But at the end of the day, once it had done it, it does work, and you essentially end up with a this is in running in a container, and all my development files are available in that container, and anything I do is restricted to the container. So it means if the agent goes wrong, or if I'm working on maybe on a repository I don't trust. So in my old life, I used to be a pen tester, and we used to often like review code bases that we didn't necessarily trust. So this is perfect for that kind of environment. I want to use Claude to try and understand a foreign code base, but I'm worried it might do something I don't want it to. So the answer is, well, you could run it in dev containers. So that works out quite well. I will say there's some setup involved. This I want to pretend that's as slick as just like running like Claude Code and having it run. You do need to do some work to make it all. You have to like get the dev container down and like set it up, and it's per project as well. So there's that bit as well. But it's quite a nice setup.
Yeah, I like, I think we were talking about before the recording how this isn't something that, yeah, I do before every vibe coding session, or really,
Mm,
I would say most people do, because it is a few extra steps, and it's
Mm.
also not necessarily straightforward. Like you mentioned, we could, throw Docker at it and
Yeah.
just try to contain things that way. But is that really the best thing?
Yeah.
Throwing it up in the cloud into something more ephemeral, does that make sense? Like it's still, I think we're still trying to figure out what the right thing is, but
Yeah.
it's important to have these conversations around
Yeah.
security because there's so many new people now to the
Mm.
party, to the dev party creating things. My biggest fear has been in all this is that people aren't familiar with apps that are written and then packages that are brought down onto your
Mm.
machine that are
Yeah.
supposedly necessary to like build
Yeah.
or whatever, and people just don't know what those packages are or how to look into them and see if they're safe or if
Yeah.
they're on some kind of list, or that's where the hallucinations come in,
Yeah.
because you'll see packages, legitimate packages will be suggested in code, but maybe they're outdated, maybe it's an
Mm.
older version, and that immediately raises a flag of, well, you can't guarantee it's the right one. It's just it's just a package that the LLM picked.
Yeah, I
So
think that the bit about versions is very true. I definitely some of the kind of work I've done with agents in the past. I was doing some looking at open telemetry, and that's quite a fast moving project. And it brought in some versions, all right, but then things didn't work. And of course, you dig into why isn't this working? And they were like 5, 6 versions out of date. So you're like, oh, that's just like old. It's not like hallucinated, but it's just the wrong versions.
right.
So I think that's everything. But for me, it's almost like there's a continuum of like how what you're doing, how risky it is how much effort you want to go to isolate it. Another approach I've been kind of like looking at was just get a terminal, right? Get a VM. So I've got a little VM I've run, and I've just installed all of the agents. So I've got Claude here. I've got what else I was looking at today. I was looking at Claude, OpenAI Codex, one called Crush, which is fairly new, Gemini CLI, and another one called Octo, which is again pretty new. And again, all of these have got dependencies. So when you're installing these tools, you're like, well, do I trust them? And they're probably fine. But on the other hand, just get a VM. That's maybe a good kind of like halfway house. It's not too hard. Get a virtual machine somewhere and then just install the tools there. And it's a bit easier to use because you can just like clone repositories, whatever you want to onto that VM and work there. But again, it's away from all of your credentials that you have and like your email and all the stuff that if something did go rogue, it could try and do bad things.
Yeah, I think for those times where it's probably fine isn't enough.
Mm,
This is sort of that next step that we all need to be familiar with,
yeah.
and that's probably not a vibe coding thing. That's probably like I need to sit down and actually think about what I'm doing here, and
Yeah.
not to like push anybody away from doing these types of things, because I think again it's important for us to know how to do it,
Yeah.
first,
I,
and I think we understand why.
Yeah, it depends a lot on what you're doing. I think you're right. And again, and I kind of look at some of the things that I know is if you're doing a security person, you might download some exploit code or something like that. That's the same kind of environment where you want to do something ephemeral, you want to do something like, I'm going to try this and throw it away. And it's how much effort you want to go to. This wasn't too hard. I mean, I set up like 5 different coding agents this morning.
Mhm.
And apart from the odd problem with authentication, where they like expect a browser to be there on the same machine, they all work pretty smoothly. So you can get those all set up and away you go. So that's definitely an option as well. And the things we have seen attackers start to try and target the thing we're talking about with hallucinations and actually like squat on common hallucinations from LLMs. The attackers are only going to get better at that kind of attack. The more people are on these systems, the more they're using them, makes it more of an attractive target. And we've seen a lot of supply chain attacks now where attackers are specifically targeting developers because they've worked out that, if I compromise this developer's machine, they might have keys to deploy a VS Code extension. That was one from this week. Or they might have keys to deploy a new NPM package. And then the attackers can use those keys to deploy new versions of software. So developers are becoming quite a tempting target. And I think with that kind of increased threat profile, it's that point you think, well, I want to be a little bit more careful, maybe to segregate things out or to split things up. Although, to be fair, with any security, there is a bit of work involved.
Yeah. Yeah, great advice, especially for the new folks sort of joining the industry, is be alert,
Mm.
on people. Shouldn't say, I don't know if I want to say like targeting you, but like they'll take advantage of your newness to the area
Yeah.
and not understanding some of the things.
Yeah. And that was, I mean, I just actually noticed that it was one that I was kind of hopeful on because I just started looking at it. Was Octo actually has a setup where they can integrate Docker directly with the tool. So Octo has a command that that actually like you run Octo and say run it in a container. So they've actually got this concept, right, of I want to use containers and integrated it into the base tool itself. But it's quite early days, so I haven't actually got that one fully working yet. But that's another one. So I think you'll see that as well. Is some of the tools will start saying, hey, this is a good idea, even just for isolation purposes, even just for like I don't want npm versions to stomp on each other. Maybe that's another thing you can solve by containerizing.
Yeah, that's a good point too. And I know, in certain tools out there, they're adding more and more features, security focused features, especially the vibe coding
Mm,
ones. Like Lovable is a good example.
yeah.
They've got a security thing that is just built in, and it'll scan for basic vulnerabilities, just warnings, and then it'll tell you if there's something really wrong
Mm,
too. So I think making that stuff a little bit more accessible for the newer people who are coming in through tools
yeah.
like Lovable is helpful too. But uh, just being able to containerize your work in general has so many other advantages too. So I think
Yeah.
it's just
Yeah.
a good
I
practice
think,
to
yeah,
understand.
the containerization is funny. It's kind of become, someone was saying they were doing a talk about 10 years of containers recently, and they said, well, containers have become boring technology. And I guess
Mhm.
at this point it has been because it's pretty much everywhere. The availability of the tools is pretty ubiquitous and people are quite used to working with them. It's just a question of getting that mindset of like, when do I need to isolate stuff? And how much isolation do I want to put around it
Right.
for different use cases?
Right.
So
Yeah.
I think we'll see more of that. I think we'll see more of this as time goes on, especially as the agents get more powerful. They get a lot of additional security features. They also get additional features, which allow them to do more and more. So that becomes a kind of thing to think about as well.
Hmm. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Anything else you want to show us before we say goodbye?
I think that was pretty good. I think that was, yeah. I think just in general, I think I definitely want to look into. I would look into dev containers. So if you're doing this is quite. Once you've got this working, it's pretty straightforward. It works with VS Code, so that's pretty nice. That's what I would recommend. And then if it otherwise looking into like maybe just getting virtual machines or even just using Docker to isolate stuff. And I think it will make people's LLM coding experience a lot more reliable at the end of the day.
Nice. Okay. Cool. Well, Rory, I appreciate you joining us and sharing some of your insight around security and some of the things we need to be thinking about these days with Gen AI getting involved. And yeah, I'd love to have you on another one in the future.
Yeah, it'd be great to always new stuff to talk about.
All right. See you.
Cheers.